Welcome to our deep dive, you guys, all about money. It's past, present, and future.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, so we're going to explore the fascinating history of money.
Okay.
How it's evolved, over centuries and where it might be headed with the rise of central bank digital currency, or CBDCs.
Right.
Our guide for this journey is this book, Everything You Need to Know About Central Bank Digital Currency.
Okay.
By Nickoy Mills. Think of it as like a crash course on everything from bartering to digital dollars.
Right.
And we'll be sure to highlight like the most insightful bits along the way.
It's a journey that takes us from, I guess, like the simplest forms of exchange to the complex systems we have today.
Right.
It raises some, really important questions about the future of finance and freedom.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. Have you ever stopped to consider the difference between money and currency? It's one of those things we use like interchangeably often, but Nickoy Mills makes a really interesting distinction in the book.
Yeah, and it's a fundamental one.
Yeah.
It often gets overlooked.
Yeah.
But money, at its core, it's this abstract concept of value. It's the idea that something has worth, something you need or want. Currency, on the other hand, is the tangible representation of that value. It's the thing we use to facilitate exchange.
So like in the book, John washing Bob's car in exchange for a loaf of bread, that's bartering.
Right.
They're directly trading goods of equal value without using any kind of currency.
Exactly. But if John washes Bob's car for a $10 bill, that bill is the currency, representing the value of his work.
Right.
And it simplifies things immensely.
Right.
Bob doesn't have to bake bread or, find something John needs in return. He can use that same $10 bill to buy anything he wants.
Right.
Currency acts as this intermediary, making transactions much smoother than trying to find a direct barter every time.
It's fascinating to think about how these systems like evolved over time. We started with bartering, then moved to using things like shells and precious metals as currency.
Right.
Then we saw the invention of coins and paper money, which must have been like revolutionary at the time.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that China was way ahead of the curve when it came to paper money. They invented jiaozi, the first paper currency, all the way back in the 7th century.
Wow.
Imagine that, over 1,300 years ago.
That's mind-blowing. But why did they need paper money back then? Was it just like a matter of convenience?
Convenience was definitely a factor, especially with, a large and growing economy like China's. Imagine like lugging around strings of heavy coins for every transaction.
Yeah.
But it also addressed a shortage of copper.
Oh.
Which was the primary metal used for coinage at the time.
Okay.
Paper money provided a more flexible and efficient way to manage transactions.
Okay.
And this evolution of money kind of brings us to a critical juncture, the rise and fall of the gold standard.
Yeah, the gold standard. Remind me how that worked again.
In simple terms, the gold standard meant that the value of a country's currency was directly linked to a fixed amount of gold. You could theoretically exchange your paper money for actual gold.
Yeah.
At any time.
That sounds straightforward. But I guess it had its limitations, right?
It did. The amount of gold a country held limited how much money it could print.
Right.
Which, could hinder economic growth.
Especially in times of crisis.
Yeah.
Plus, if everyone suddenly decided to redeem their paper money for gold, it could lead to, a major shortage and chaos.
Right.
Which is precisely what happened during the Great Depression.
So that's why it eventually collapsed. And that collapse led to the system we have today, fiat currency.
Exactly. Fiat currency is money backed by, trust in the government, not gold.
Okay.
It's a fascinating but arguably fragile system.
Fragile because it all hinges on trust. Yeah.
If people lose faith in the government or the economy, the value of fiat currency can, plummet, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's like a collective belief that these pieces of paper or these digital numbers in our bank accounts actually mean something.
Okay.
It's a shared illusion in a way.
Right.
But a powerful one that underpins our entire financial system.
So how does this system actually work? The book gets into the mechanics of fractional reserve banking.
Right.
Which sounds kind of complicated.
It can seem that way.
Yeah.
But the core concept is fairly straightforward.
Okay.
Banks create money through lending, but they only need to keep a fraction of deposits in reserve.
The book uses that example of John Doe depositing $100 into his bank account.
Right. Let's say the reserve requirement is 10%.
Okay.
The bank keeps $10 of John's deposit in reserve, but can lend out the remaining $90 to someone else.
Okay.
The person who borrowed that $90 can deposit it into another bank, which then lends out 90% of that, and so on.
Right. And this creates a ripple effect. It's called the multiplier effect, which expands the money supply and fuels economic growth.
It's like a chain reaction of money creation.
Yeah.
But as we saw in the 2008 financial crisis, this system can be vulnerable, can't it?
Absolutely. When trust erodes, as it did in 2008, and people start withdrawing their money en masse, banks can collapse.
Right.
Because they don't actually have all the money they've lent out on hand.
Like a giant game of musical chairs where someone is bound to be left standing when the music stops.
Yeah.
So this whole system of fiat currency and fractional reserve banking, this is what brings us to the doorstep of CBDCs, right?
You got it.
They're being proposed as a potential solution to some of the problems with the current system.
But before we jump into CBDCs, maybe we should take a closer look at how transactions work in our current system. This will help us, better understand how CBDCs might change things. All right, let's unpack that. Seems like a good place to pause for now.
Welcome back. Before we paused, we were about to explore the mechanics of our current transaction system.
Right.
Something we take for granted.
Yeah.
But it helps illustrate how CBDCs could change the way we move money.
Okay, let's get into it. So, right now, when I use my debit card to buy something, it feels instantaneous. Is it really happening that quickly?
Not quite.
Yeah.
When you swipe your card, your bank authorizes the purchase.
Okay.
But the actual transfer of funds happens a bit later.
Yep.
It usually involves, daily settlements between banks.
Okay.
This behind-the-scenes process involving batch processing and reconciliation of those transactions.
So it's not like money magically zaps from my account to the store's account the second I swipe my card.
Exactly. But with CBDCs, it would be different because CBDCs would be a direct liability of the central bank.
Okay.
Transactions could be settled in real time.
Oh, wow.
The money would move instantly from your digital wallet to the merchants, making transactions faster, cheaper, and more efficient.
That sounds pretty convenient. But it also raises that big question about privacy, right? If every transaction is recorded in real time on a central bank ledger, it creates a permanent traceable record of our spending habits.
You're hitting on one of the most controversial aspects of CBDCs.
Yeah.
Proponents argue that this transparency could help combat fraud and money laundering.
Okay.
But critics worry about government surveillance.
Right.
And the potential for abuse.
The book even mentions the possibility of like a social credit system tied to CBDCs, where your spending habits could affect your access to services, or even your ability to travel. It's kind of unsettling.
It's a valid concern. If CBDCs are implemented without robust privacy protections, it could create a system where the government can punish or reward citizens based on their financial behavior.
Right.
Raises a lot of questions about the future of freedom in a digital world.
Speaking of things that raise questions, the book argues that the COVID-19 pandemic was a pivotal event that accelerated the shift towards a more digital and controlled world.
It's hard to deny that the pandemic created an environment of fear and uncertainty.
Yeah.
Which made people more willing to accept government restrictions on their freedoms. We saw this with lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine passports.
Right.
All presented as temporary necessities to protect public health.
But those measures set a precedent for government overreach that could have lasting implications, right?
Right.
And on top of that, the pandemic forced us to rely even more heavily on digital technologies for everything.
Absolutely. We became more reliant on online platforms for work, communication, shopping, entertainment.
Yeah.
Our digital footprints expanded exponentially during the pandemic, giving governments and corporations even more insight into our lives.
The book even suggests that the pandemic was like a kind of trial run.
Interesting.
For the Great Reset agenda, this idea of using global crises to reshape the world.
It's a bold claim.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to consider how the pandemic created conditions that could be seen as favorable to those who seek greater control.
Right.
It definitely accelerated trends that were already underway.
So let's talk about the importance of cash.
Okay.
The book makes a strong case for preserving cash as a tool for freedom and privacy. It's the only truly anonymous form of payment, right? No digital record.
Exactly. When you use cash, there's no intermediary, no digital trail.
Right.
And that's why some governments and central banks are so eager to move towards a cashless society.
Because it gives them more control. They can track and potentially influence every transaction.
A cashless society is a more transparent society,
Right.
which can be both beneficial and concerning.
Right.
It could be good for catching criminals.
Right.
But what does it mean for individual privacy and autonomy? It's a delicate balance.
The book also dives into the hidden costs of electronic payments. We often think of digital transactions as free, but there are those small fees associated with every swipe of our debit cards or click of our mouse.
Those fees, while seemingly insignificant, add up over time
Yeah.
and can diminish the purchasing power of our money.
Right.
They also generate huge profits for payment processors and banks.
And with CBDCs, wouldn't these fees go directly to the central bank?
That's a possibility.
Okay.
And that raises concerns about the potential for the government to profit from every transaction we make.
Right.
It's another layer to consider when thinking about the potential downsides of a CBDC-driven future.
Okay, so we've talked about CBDCs and the potential risks to our freedom and privacy. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about cryptocurrencies.
Okay.
The book presents them as a potential counterforce to this idea of centralized control.
Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin operate independently of governments and central banks.
Okay.
They're decentralized,
Okay.
which means they aren't controlled by any single entity.
So they're like the Wild West of digital money.
In a way, yes. They offer a level of anonymity and freedom that you don't find in traditional financial systems.
But they're also volatile and risky, right? The value can fluctuate wildly. And there's always the risk of scams and hacks. We've seen that play out recently with the collapse of FTX.
That's true. Cryptocurrencies are still a relatively new and evolving technology.
Right.
And there are definitely risks involved. But for many, they represent an alternative to the centralized control of traditional financial systems.
It's like a tug of war
Yeah.
between centralized and decentralized systems. A battle for the future of money, as the book puts it.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's a battle with huge implications for individual freedom and economic power.
Okay, let's get back to this idea of the Great Reset.
Right.
The book paints a pretty concerning picture, suggesting it's a plan to consolidate power among a global elite.
The Great Reset is often framed as a way to build a more sustainable and equitable world.
Okay.
But critics see it as a power grab disguised as benevolence, a way to transfer wealth and power from the many to the few.
The book even uses the term global enslavement at one point, which is pretty strong language.
It is strong language,
Yeah.
but it reflects the level of concern that many people have about this agenda.
Yeah.
They worry about losing control over their lives and being subjected to the dictates of a powerful elite.
So let's break down some of the key elements of the Great Reset that the book highlights. One of the core tenets is this idea of stakeholder capitalism, right?
Exactly. Stakeholder capitalism is the idea that businesses should prioritize the interests of all stakeholders, not just shareholders. This includes employees, customers, and environment, and society as a whole.
It sounds good on the surface. Instead of just focusing on profits,
Right.
companies are considering their impact on the world around them.
That's the idea, at least.
Yeah.
But critics worry that stakeholder capitalism is a way for unelected elites to dictate how businesses operate, potentially stifling innovation and competition. Who gets to decide what's best for all these stakeholders?
Yeah.
And what happens when those interests conflict?
It raises a lot of questions about accountability and transparency.
For sure.
The book also mentions the Great Reset's focus on sustainability, which again seems like a good thing on the surface.
Sustainability is a crucial goal.
Right.
But it's often used as a justification for policies that increase government control over our lives.
Okay.
We see this with proposals for restrictions on travel,
Okay.
energy consumption,
Right.
even our diets.
All in the name of saving the planet, but potentially at the cost of individual freedom and choice.
Right.
And the book highlights the push for a global digital identity system as well, which is pretty Orwellian.
A global digital ID would create a centralized database of personal information that could be used to track and control our movements,
Right.
our finances,
Okay.
potentially every aspect of our lives. It raises major concerns about privacy and surveillance.
Okay, so we've talked about the Great Reset's agenda, but who are the people behind it? The book points to organizations like the World Economic Forum and the United Nations.
The World Economic Forum, or WEF, is probably best known for its annual Davos Summit,
Right.
where the global elite gather to discuss their plans for the future.
Right.
And the WEF has been very vocal about its support for the Great Reset.
And the UN is involved, too.
The UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, with its 17 Sustainable Development Goals,
Okay.
is seen by many as a blueprint for the Great Reset.
Okay.
It's a complex set of goals aimed at addressing global challenges like poverty, inequality, and climate change.
Right.
But critics see it as a way to advance a globalist agenda and erode national sovereignty.
So it's like a coordinated effort by powerful institutions and individuals to reshape the world according to their vision. And they seem to be using crises like the pandemic to accelerate their plans.
That's the perception among those who are skeptical of this agenda. They see a pattern of manufactured crises being used to justify policies that would otherwise be met with resistance.
So if this Great Reset is really happening, what can we do about it? Does the book offer any solutions?
The book doesn't offer any easy answers,
Okay.
but it stresses the importance of awareness, education, and resistance. We need to understand what's happening, share that knowledge with others, and push back against policies that erode our freedoms.
That's where things start to feel a little overwhelming. It's hard to know where to even begin.
It's true. But I think the first step is simply to be aware, to pay attention to the trends that are shaping our world.
And to have open and honest conversations about the future we want to create.
Exactly. We need to have those conversations and be willing to challenge the narratives that are being presented to us.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We started with the history of money, explored the potential of CBDCs, and even delved into the controversial world of the Great Reset.
It's a lot to take in, but I think it highlights the importance of staying informed and engaged.
Yeah.
These are complex issues with far-reaching consequences, and they deserve our careful consideration.
Let's pause here and come back to wrap up this deep dive. Welcome back, everybody. So we've gone through a lot, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. It's a lot to digest.
We started with the history of money, explored the potential of CBDCs, and we even delved into that pretty controversial world, the Great Reset.
The Great Reset.
So where do we go from here? What does it all mean for the future of freedom in like a digital age?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. I mean, the shift toward digital currencies, and just like this increased reliance on technology, it's a dilemma. On the one hand, you've got convenience, efficiency, the potential to improve financial inclusion, but on the other hand, we've got these very serious concerns about privacy, control, the erosion of personal liberties. It's like we're standing at a crossroads, facing two very different paths.
Two very different paths.
Yeah.
And which path we choose will have a profound impact on like the future of humanity.
Right.
It's not an exaggeration to say the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah. The decisions we make in the coming years will determine, whether we embrace a future of freedom.
Right.
Or succumb to a future of tyranny.
Yeah. At least when it comes to our finances, I guess.
At least when it comes to that.
How much control we have over our own money.
Yeah, it's really a question of, how much power do we want to cede to these centralized institutions?
Yeah, it feels like we're living in like a real life sci-fi novel sometimes.
It does.
But like Nickoy Mills says in the book, the future isn't predetermined.
It's not set in stone. We have agency. We can choose, and that starts with being informed and engaged.
Yeah, being skeptical.
Yeah.
We can't just blindly accept the narratives. That are being presented to us.
Right. We need to be asking those tough questions, challenging those assumptions.
Yeah.
Thinking critically. About the implications. We can't just be passive bystanders.
No, we can't. So we need to be aware of the potential risks of CBDCs, the implications of the Great Reset, and that broader agenda of, centralized control.
We also need to be open to the potential benefits of innovation. Right. I mean, explore those alternative systems like cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
They offer greater decentralization, individual empowerment. It's a balancing act.
We need to find a way to harness the power of technology.
Yeah.
Without sacrificing our freedoms.
It really starts with education and awareness.
Okay.
understanding how these systems work. What are the trade-offs? What choices do we even have? We need to be active participants in shaping this future of money.
So to wrap up our deep dive, I think we've been on quite the journey through the history and future of money.
We have, and the road ahead is full of twists and turns.
Oh, yeah. But one thing's clear. The future of money, it isn't just about technology. It's about freedom and choice and what kind of world we want to create.
Exactly.
So we all need to be a part of that conversation. Think about the role that money plays in your life, the choices that you make, the systems you're participating in, and the future you want to create. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating and sometimes unsettling world of money.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.